Today we take a look at Psalm 2, verse 7, which in a lot of respects is the climax of this particular psalm. And so we'll translate it, but it'll be a longer video because there's a lot of very fascinating connections that are made back to this psalm in the New Testament. And we're going to remind ourselves that in 2 verse 6, the anointed one, the Messiah, who's been enthroned on Zion, the holy hill, is speaking. And so now we're going to pick up with what he says even further. Diangelon ta prostagma Kyriou, Kyrios epen pros me, huios mu esu, ego semeron gegeneka se. Well, this first participle is continuing what this Messiah figure is speaking. It is from diangelo, and you'll see the omega nu ending here, which isn't a genitive plural. This is nominative singular masculine present active participle. So announcing or declaring. So this is continuing his speech. And what's he declaring? It's the prostagma, which is translating the Hebrew chok here, which is a statute or a command, and it's the command of the Lord. Remember that Kyrios has shown up a couple times previously in the psalm. You have these two divine persona who are speaking to one another. And so the Messiah figure is saying, I am announcing the statute or the command of the Lord. And then he says, the Lord said, apen, that's the third singular aorist of lego, to me. And so I mentioned this in a prior video. We have a very interesting dialogue here between the Kyrios and the Messiah figure. You have one person speaking to me. So you have these persona, these prosopa that are in conversation. So the anointed figure is now saying, here's what the Lord said to me as the anointed one on the throne. Huios mu esu. So this is you are, that's the second singular of me, my son. So it's a beautiful declaration that he is his son, in a certain sense at his right hand, which anticipates Psalm 110. And then he goes on to say, ego, that is the Lord. Semeron here is today, on this day. Gegenekase, which is the first singular, perfect, active indicative from genao. Notice the double in there, the kappa plus the reduplication. Today I have begotten you. Today I have begotten you. So beautiful way that this psalm builds to this climax of the Lord declaring the sonship of his anointed one and this begetting. And this psalm, this particular verse is alluded to in the baptism of Jesus. So you see that in Matthew 3 as well as the parallels in Mark and Luke. And what's interesting in the Lucan form in Luke 3, even though in the traditional sort of the standard text of the baptism scene, it's not quite verbatim from Psalm 2:7. It'd be something like, this is my beloved son, or you are my beloved son. In Codex Bezae and some other manuscripts, you actually see the exact wording of Psalm 2:7 inserted at Luke 3:22 in particular for the Father's speech to the Son. And then you also have this psalm alluded to in the Transfiguration, Matthew 17, as well as the parallels. And that reinforces this idea that basically what the psalm is doing is you have the Father, now, which is basically Kyrios in the original Greek, or Yahweh in the Hebrew, speaking to the divine Son here, which is both the Christos, as we've seen earlier in the psalm, and also the Huios. And so the gospel writers are unpacking this psalm and expressing how it is getting at a conversation between the Father and the Son that is then manifested below, if you will, in his baptism and again in his transfigurations, which is interesting because Psalm 2 is taking place on a oros, which is also where the transfiguration takes place. But it gets even more interesting if you look at Hebrews 1. Hebrews 1 famously is unpacking the deity of Jesus, and it has a bunch of Old Testament citations in a row. Unpacking that, and Hebrews 1:5 is where it starts. The writer says this, for to which of the angels did God ever say, you are my son, today I have begotten you? This is a direct quotation of what we just looked at. And notice that the writer of Hebrews is picking up on the fact that this is a speech between God the Father and God the Son. And he's using that to reiterate that Jesus, that the divine Son is actually superior to the angels because this particular psalm is actually addressed to him. The Lord said to me, you are my son. And so in Hebrews at least, Psalm 2:7 is picking up on the pre-existent deity of Jesus, because that's the whole point of Hebrews 1, is using the scriptures to point that out. And it's interesting, it starts with this very psalm, verbatim from the Greek. But that's not the only way this psalm can be played out. We also see it in Acts 13:33, where the speaker here says, by raising Jesus, so we're talking about the resurrection, as also it is written in the second psalm. And so already by the time of the New Testament, it's the Psalter has a particular shape. This one they already are, it's already known as the second psalm. And then you are my son, today I have begotten you, again, exactly quoting this. So the frame of reference here is not necessarily pre-existence, nor is it his baptism, nor is it the transfiguration, but this is actually in reference to the resurrection. So in other words, if you look at Psalm 2, it has a lot of ways that it's pointing to Jesus. It's referring to his pre-existence, his divine nature, his baptism, his transfiguration, his resurrection, and then eventually we'll see how Psalm 10 is going to anticipate his re-enthronement, if you will, his session at the right hand of God. So it's very, very fascinating what's going on with this psalm. I know it's been a longer video, but I hope this has been fun to make these different connections. There's actually a lot more we could do because Psalm 2 is so fruitful for the New Testament, but hopefully this whets your appetite. Thanks for sticking in there.